What if everything you believe about the Vikings is only half the story? Welcome to Storyland. If you're new here, we are truly happy to have you with us. Tonight, we traveled back more than 1,200 years to the cold shores of Scandinavia, where legends were born, empires were forged, and entire continents were changed forever. The Vikings were not just raiders. They were farmers, poets, shipbuilders, traders, explorers, and empire makers. Their story is far bigger and far more human than the myths. So sit back, relax, and let us uncover the true history of the Vikings. To understand the Viking Age, we first need to look at the world they were born into. This is a time of massive change across Europe. The once mighty Western Roman Empire had crumbled centuries earlier, leaving behind a patchwork of competing kingdoms and tribes. In the south, the Byzantine Empire, the eastern remnant of Rome, still held vast power from its capital in Constantinople. Meanwhile, the Islamic caliphates were expanding across North Africa and into Spain, creating a vibrant cultural and scientific golden age. Further north, the Frankish Empire under Charlemagne was on the rise. He was a powerful Christian king who aimed to unite Western Europe under his rule, creating a new Roman Empire. This created a massive, wealthy, and organized civilization right on the doorstep of Scandinavia. To the west, the British Isles were a collection of smaller Anglo-Saxon, Pictish, and Irish kingdoms, often at war with each other. These lands were rich in farmland and, crucially, home to wealthy monasteries filled with gold and silver. These monasteries were often located on isolated coastlines, making them tempting and vulnerable targets. Now, let's turn our gaze to Scandinavia itself, the homeland of the people we would come to call Vikings. This wasn't a unified region. It was a land of dense forests, jagged mountains, and long, winding coastlines called fjords. Life was hard. The soil was often poor, and the winters were long and brutal. The people who lived here were organized into clans and small chiefdoms, led by powerful jarls, or chiefs. They were farmers, fishers, and hunters, deeply connected to the land and the sea. Their society was built on loyalty, honor, and a complex legal system. Disputes were often settled at local assemblies called things, where free men would gather to make laws and pass judgments. This pre-Viking Scandinavia was not an isolated backwater. For centuries, these Norse people had been trading. They traded furs, amber, and walrus ivory for goods from the south, like Frankish swords, glassware, and Roman silver coins. This trade brought not only wealth, but also knowledge of the world beyond their shores. They heard stories of the rich lands of the Franks and the Anglo-Saxons. They saw the advanced technology of their neighbors. And most importantly, they developed incredible shipbuilding skills. Their ships, which would eventually evolve into the iconic longship, were masterpieces of design, capable of sailing in both shallow rivers and the open ocean. One key reason was overpopulation. Good farmland was scarce in Scandinavia, and as the population grew, younger sons of chieftains had to seek their fortunes elsewhere. They couldn't inherit land, so they had to earn it through adventure and conquest. Another major factor was political instability. Powerful kings in Denmark and Norway were starting to consolidate power, forcing smaller chieftains and rivals to either submit or flee. For many, becoming a Viking was a way to maintain their freedom and status. Then there was the lure of wealth. The growing trade networks had shown the Scandinavians just how rich their southern neighbors were. The monasteries in Britain and Ireland were particularly attractive. They were poorly defended and filled with treasures. The first recorded Viking raid on the monastery of Lindisfarne in 793 was a shock to the Christian world. But for the raiders, it was likely a calculated strike on a known, wealthy target. This single event is often seen as the dramatic start of the Viking Age. It was a declaration that a new, formidable power had arrived on the world stage. This first raid opened the floodgates. The success of the Lindisfarne attack proved that these raids were incredibly profitable. Soon, fleets of longships were leaving Scandinavia every summer, heading for the coasts of Britain, Ireland, and France. But it's crucial to remember that this wasn't just mindless violence. These were organized expeditions, often led by skilled chiefs. They were looking for portable wealth, gold, silver, and slaves that, they could bring back home to increase their status and power. And while raiding was a huge part of the Viking Age, it was only one part. From the very beginning, Vikings were also traders and settlers. In the east, Swedish Vikings, known as the Russ, traveled down the great rivers of Eastern Europe. They weren't just raiding, they were establishing vast trade networks connecting the Baltic Sea all the way to Constantinople and Baghdad. They traded furs and slaves for silks, spices, and silver from the Byzantine and Islamic worlds. These Rus Vikings would eventually found the state that became modern-day Russia and Ukraine. Their influence was so profound that the name Russia itself is believed to derive from the name Rus. Meanwhile, in the West, Vikings began to settle in the lands they raided. Large Viking armies started to overwinter in England and France, eventually carving out their own territories. In England, this became known as the Danelaw, a huge area in the north and east of the country that was governed by Danish laws and customs. In France, the Viking leader Rollo was granted a huge territory by the French king in exchange for protecting the kingdom from other Viking raiders. This territory would become known as. These settlers weren't just warriors. They became farmers, merchants, and rulers, blending their Norse culture with the local populations. And then there was the exploration. Driven by a thirst for new lands and resources, Vikings pushed the boundaries of the known world. They were arguably the greatest explorers of their time. Using the sun and stars to navigate, they sailed their incredible longships into the uncharted waters of the North Atlantic. They discovered and settled the Faroe Islands and Iceland, creating a new society based on their old laws in a completely empty land. From Iceland, the legendary Eric the Red led an expedition even further west, establishing a settlement in a vast, icy land he shrewdly named Greenland to attract more settlers. But the story doesn't end there. Around the year 1000, Eric's own son, Leif Erikson, sailed even further west from Greenland. He landed in a place he called Vinland, a land of wild grapes, timber, and salmon. We now know this was North America. Leif Erikson and his crew were the first Europeans to set foot on the continent, nearly 500 years. They even attempted to establish a settlement, but conflicts with the native inhabitants, whom they called Skrullings, and the sheer distance from home made it impossible to sustain. The Viking Age of expansion had reached its absolute limit. The end of the Viking Age wasn't a sudden collapse, but a gradual transformation. Over the course of 3 centuries, the world had changed, and so had the Vikings. The kingdoms of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden became more centralized and organized, much like the other nations of Europe. The adoption of Christianity was a massive factor. As Viking kings converted, they brought their people into the fold of mainstream European culture, building churches instead of raiding them. The old pagan beliefs and the warrior ethos slowly faded. The age of raiding gave way to an age of diplomacy, royal marriages, and conventional warfare. The year 1066 is often cited as the symbolic end of the Viking Age. In that single year, the King of Norway, Harald Hardrada, often called the last great Viking, invaded England, but was defeated and killed at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Just a few weeks later, England was invaded again, this time by William, the Duke of Normandy. And who was William? He was a direct descendant of the Viking chieftain Rollo. So, in a way, the Viking Age ended with a Viking descendant conquering the English throne. The raiders had become kings. Their legacy was no longer one of raids and longships, but of kingdoms, laws, and languages that would shape Europe for centuries to come. Their story is a powerful reminder that history is never simple. The fearsome pirates who terrorized Europe were also the intrepid explorers who reached America, the savvy merchants who connected continents, and the founders of nations. When you think of Vikings, what comes to mind? Fearsome warriors with horned helmets, longships crashing onto foreign shores, and epic battles. Right, we're going to pull back the curtain on that popular image. Because behind every warrior was a family. And the truth is, most Vikings weren't full-time raiders at all. They were farmers, craftsmen, and traders. They were parents and children, living lives that were surprisingly complex and, in many ways, just like ours. So, let's leave the battlefield for a moment and step into the real world of the Vikings. The backbone of Viking society wasn't the sword. The vast majority of people lived on farms, often in remote fjords or scattered across the Scandinavian landscape. Life was tied to the seasons and the hard work of agriculture. Their diet wasn't a constant feast of roasted meat. Instead, it was built on what they could grow and gather. They cultivated hardy crops like barley, rye, and oats. These grains were turned into bread, porridge, and, of course, the famous Viking ale. They also raised livestock, cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs, provided milk, wool, and meat. But meat was more of a special occasion treat than an everyday staple. Given their proximity to the sea, it's no surprise that fishing was a huge part of their lives. They fished in the rivers, lakes, and the vast North Sea, catching cod, herring, and salmon. These fish could be eaten fresh, but more importantly, they were dried, smoked, or salted to preserve them for the long, harsh winters. Imagine a Viking family working together to pull in the day's catch, the salty spray in their faces. This wasn't about glory or conquest. It was about survival and providing for your loved ones. The rhythm of their life was dictated by the harvest, the catch, and the changing weather. So where did these families live? Not in castles, but in iconic longhouses. These were long, narrow buildings, often built from timber, with walls of wattle and daub or turf. Picture a single, large room, sometimes up to 100 feet long. In the center, a long hearth. A fire pit would burn day and night. This was the heart of the home. It provided light, warmth against the biting Scandinavian cold, and a place to cook meals. There were no chimneys, just a hole in the roof to let the smoke escape. You can imagine the air inside being thick with the smell of wood smoke, cooking food, and the general scent of life. These longhouses weren't just for one nuclear family. They often housed an entire extended family: grandparents, parents, children, and sometimes even farmhands or servants, all living together under one roof. Benches lined the walls, serving as a place to sit, work, and sleep. Privacy was a concept that didn't really exist. Life was communal. People shared stories, mended tools, and worked on crafts together around the central fire. It was a space buzzing with constant activity, a microcosm of the entire community. It was here, in the warmth of the longhouse, that the Viking family unit truly came to life. Now, let's talk about something that makes Viking societies stand out, especially in medieval Europe: the role of women. While the men might be famous for sailing and raiding, the women were the masters of the household. They held a significant amount of power and respect. When the men were away on long voyages, it was the women who managed the farms, the finances, and the entire estate. The woman of the house was often called the Husfreyja, or Lady of the House, and she held the keys to the food stores and chests, a powerful symbol of her authority. Unlike many of their European contemporaries, Viking women had legal rights. They could own property and land in their own name. They could inherit wealth, and they had the right to initiate a divorce. If a marriage ended, a woman was entitled to a dowry and her share of the couple's property. This gave them a level of independence and security that was incredibly rare for the time. They weren't just wives and mothers. They were business partners, managers, and legally recognized individuals. This challenges the stereotype of a purely patriarchal warrior society and shows a much more balanced and pragmatic approach to gender roles. Beyond the farm, Viking society was filled with skilled artisans and craftsmen. They weren't just brute warriors. They were creators of incredible beauty and utility. Blacksmiths were among the most respected members of the community. They were the masters of fire and iron, forging not just swords and axes, but also the essential tools needed for farming and daily life: plowshares, nails, knives, and cooking pots. A good blacksmith was seen as almost magical, able to transform raw earth into an object of strength and purpose. Their forges were a hub of noise and activity, a vital part of every settlement. Woodworkers and shipbuilders were equally crucial. Using simple tools, they could turn timber into everything from intricate carvings on a church door to the magnificent longships that defined the era. Jewelers worked with silver, bronze, and gold, creating the beautiful brooches, necklaces, and arm rings that we see in museums today. These weren't just decorations. They were a display of wealth and status, and often had deep symbolic meaning. Every object, from a simple wooden spoon to a finely crafted sword, tells a story of the skill and artistry that was woven into the fabric of everyday Viking life. You might think of them as lawless raiders, but Vikings had a complex and sophisticated legal system. It wasn't based on a king's decree, but on a collective agreement. Communities were governed by a local assembly called a thing. This was an outdoor gathering where all free men of the area could come and have their say. They would settle disputes, pass neolavas, and witness legal agreements. It was a form of early democracy. Justice was a community affair, and reputation and honor were everything. An oath was a sacred promise, and breaking it could lead to you being declared an outlaw. This meant you were outside the protection of the law. Anyone could harm you without punishment, and your property could be taken. Their legal codes, like the Icelandic GRGs, were incredibly detailed, covering everything from land ownership to insults. So while they could be brutal in warfare, their society at home was built on a surprisingly ordered system of laws, honor, and mutual responsibility. The chaos of the raid was balanced by the order of the thing. So, where did the next generation of Vikings learn all of this? How were these values, stories, and skills passed down? It all started in childhood. Viking children didn't go to formal schools. Instead, they learned by doing. Boys would learn farming, sailing, and fighting skills from their fathers and uncles. Girls would learn how to manage a household, spin wool, and prepare food from their mothers and grandmothers. They learned the practical skills needed to survive and thrive in their world. These weren't just bedtime stories. They were a way of explaining the world, teaching morality, and reinforcing their cultural identity. This oral tradition was the glue that held their culture together. In a world where most people couldn't read or write, history and literature were kept alive by memory. This was the job of the skalds. Skalds were highly respected poets and storytellers. They were the keepers of history, composing complex poems that celebrated the deeds of jarls and kings, lamented a hero's death, or recounted an epic battle. Their poetry was intricate, full of kennings which are like metaphorical nicknames and complex rhyme schemes. They were entertainers, historians, and propagandists, all in one. They would perform their poems, often accompanied by a harp or lyre, ensuring that a leader's fame and a family's legacy would live on for generations. It was through these skalds and 1,000 anonymous storytellers by the hearth that the sagas, the epic tales of Norse heroes and families, were preserved until they were finally written down centuries later. And this is exactly why I love Viking history. When you look past the caricatures of the horned helmets and the berserker rage, you find something deeply human. You find women running households with a level of authority that was revolutionary for its time. You find craftsmen pouring their soul into creating objects of both beauty and function. You find parents telling their children stories of gods and heroes to teach them about the world. Behind the battles, there were real families, real emotions, real dreams. They worried about their children. They hoped for a good harvest. They mourned their dead, and they celebrated their triumphs. They were innovators, explorers, and artists. They were complicated and contradictory. They were, in the end, just like us. People living their lives, doing the best they could in the world they knew. And that, I think, is a story far more compelling than any tale of simple raiding and warfare. What if everything you believe about the Vikings is only half the story? Their story is far bigger and far more human than the myths. So sit back, relax, and let us uncover the true history of the Vikings. To truly understand the Viking Age, we first have to ask a simple question. What was life like before it? Picture this. It's the early 8th century, 100 years before the first longships appeared on the horizon. Scandinavia, what we now know as Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, was not a unified kingdom. It was a mosaic of petty chiefdoms and small communities, each with its own ruler, its own customs, and its own struggles. Life was tough. The winters were long and brutal. The land was challenging to farm. People lived in long houses, large communal buildings made of wood and earth, where families, workers, and even livestock would huddle together for warmth against the unforgiving cold. Their world was steeped in mythology, a rich tapestry of gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya, who governed everything from war and thunder to fertility and the harvest. These weren't just stories, they were the very fabric of their reality, explaining the world around them and their place within it. But don't mistake this pre-Viking era for a primitive backwater. These societies were surprisingly sophisticated. They were master woodworkers and skilled metalworkers, crafting intricate jewelry, tools, and weapons. And most importantly, they were already exceptional seafarers. Scandinavians were building sturdy boats to navigate the complex coastlines, fjords, and rivers of their homeland. They weren't just staying home either. They were trading. Archaeological finds show us that goods from Scandinavia were traveling across the Baltic Sea and down the rivers of Eastern Europe. They traded amber, furs, and walrus ivory for things they couldn't get at home, like silver, fine cloth, and glass from the Byzantine Empire in the Middle East. These early trade routes were the arteries of their world, connecting them to distant cultures and new ideas. This early seafaring and trading experience was the training ground, the crucible that would eventually forge the fearsome and adventurous spirit of the Viking Age. They were learning the seas, building their networks, and honing the skills that would soon allow them to burst onto the world stage in a way nobody could have predicted. So, what changed? What was the spark that ignited the flame of the Viking Age? Historians point to a perfect storm of factors. First, there was population pressure. Better farming techniques and a slightly warmer climate led to more people, and more people meant more mouths to feed and less land to go around. The powerful Frankish Empire under Charlemagne was expanding northward, creating both a threat and an opportunity. The Franks were rich, and their monasteries and towns, often located on coasts and rivers, were attempting poorly defended targets. And perhaps most crucially, there was a technological breakthrough. This was the game changer. Sleek, fast, and with a shallow draft. The longship could cross the open ocean and then sail up shallow rivers, allowing raiders to strike deep into enemy territory with terrifying speed and surprise. It was a masterpiece of naval engineering, the ultimate tool for both raiding and trading. This combination of motive, opportunity, and technology set the stage for the first recorded Viking raid. In the year 793, a small fleet of longships appeared off the coast of Northumbria in England. They landed on the holy island of Lindisfarne, a wealthy and respected center of Christianity. What happened next sent shockwaves across Europe. The raiders plundered the monastery, stealing its gold and silver treasures. And the event was recorded with horror by a scholar named Alcuin, who wrote, "Never before has such a terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from a pagan race." This wasn't just a robbery. It was a sacrilege, an attack on God himself. The age of the Vikings had begun, but Lindisfarne was just the start. In the decades that followed, these raids became more frequent, more ambitious, and more organized. They were no longer just small hit-and-run attacks. Large fleets, sometimes numbering hundreds of ships, began to overwinter in foreign lands, establishing fortified camps from which they could launch larger campaigns. They weren't just interested in plunder anymore. They wanted land. The Great Heathen Army, a massive coalition of Norse warriors, invaded England in the 860s, not just to raid, but to conquer. They toppled Anglo-Saxon kingdoms and established their own rule over a vast territory that became known as the Danelaw. Their influence is still visible today in the place names and dialect of northern England, and their ambitions stretched far beyond Britain. Vikings sailed down the rivers of modern-day Russia and Ukraine, establishing trade routes that reached all the way to Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. There, they were known as the Rus, a name that would eventually give rise to the nation of Russia. They served as elite mercenaries for the Byzantine emperor, known as the Varangian Guard, famed for their loyalty and ferocity. Others turned west, into the vast, unknown expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. It was a temporary settlement, eventually abandoned, but it stands as a breathtaking testament to their incredible skill, courage, and unquenchable thirst for exploration. They had reached the edge of the known world and stepped beyond it. So, who were these people really? As we said at the beginning, they were far more than just violent raiders. Viking society was surprisingly complex and, in some ways, quite progressive. It was organized around a strong legal code. Disputes were settled at local assemblies called things, where free men could voice their opinions and vote on important matters. This was an early form of democracy, a system where law, not the whim of a single ruler, held sway. Women in Viking society also enjoyed a level of freedom and rights that was unheard of in much of Europe at the time. They could own property, inherit land, initiate a divorce, and run the farm or business while their husbands were away trading or raiding. Strong, capable women are a common feature in the Norse sagas, reflecting the important role they played in society, and their culture was rich with art and poetry. They were master storytellers, preserving their history, myths, and values through epic poems and sagas passed down orally from one generation to the next. Their art, seen in intricate wood carvings, metalwork, and rune stones, is full of swirling animals and complex patterns, a unique and powerful aesthetic that is instantly recognizable. Ultimately, the Viking Age didn't end with a bang, but a whimper. It gradually faded away over the course of the 11th century. The Scandinavian homelands consolidated into more centralized kingdoms, resembling the other feudal states of Europe. The adoption of Christianity was a major factor, replacing the Old Norse gods and integrating Scandinavia into the broader European Christian culture. The motivations for raiding diminished as these new kingdoms focused on internal stability and conventional trade. The descendants of the Vikings who had settled abroad in England, Normandy, and Russia assimilated into the local populations, adopting their languages and customs. The Norse explorer became the Norman knight, but their legacy is undeniable. They reshaped the political map of Europe, created new trade networks, pushed the boundaries of the known world, and left their genetic and cultural mark on countless peoples. They were a force of change, a catalyst that helped propel Europe from the Dark Ages into the High Middle Ages. Their story is not just one of violence and plunder, but of adaptation, innovation, and a relentless human drive to explore what lies over the horizon. You think of Vikings, and you probably picture longships, horned helmets which they didn't actually wear, and brutal raids on unsuspecting monasteries. But have you ever stopped to ask why asterisks? They didn't just wake up one morning and decide to raid Europe. Something pushed them. What was happening in their homeland, in Scandinavia, that lit the fuse for the Viking Age? To understand the explosion, we first have to understand the pressure cooker. Let's rewind the clock. We're a century earlier, around the year 700 CE. Picture Scandinavia. This isn't the romantic, epic landscape you might imagine from TV shows. Not yet, anyway. It's a harsh, unforgiving land. The winters are brutally long, dark, and cold, burying the world under a thick blanket of snow and ice. The summers, by contrast, are desperately short. This tiny window of warmth and light is all you have to grow everything you need to survive the next long winter. Life for the average person, who we'll call a proto-Viking for now, was a constant struggle. Most families lived on small, isolated farms carved out of the dense forests, or clinging to the rocky coastlines. Their world was small. Your daily life revolved around your farmstead, your family, your clan. These weren't sprawling cities. They were scattered communities, connected by treacherous sea routes and dense, dark woods. Forget about a unified kingdom of Vikings. At this point, there were no kings of Norway, Denmark, or Sweden as we know them. Power was local. It was held by chieftains, or jarls, who commanded the loyalty of the free farmers in their region. This society was built on a foundation of loyalty, honor, and survival. Your clan was everything. It was your social safety net, your army, and your identity. You owed your loyalty to your chieftain, and in return, he offered protection and settled disputes. Life was governed by a complex set of social rules. It was a life of subsistence. You grew barley and oats, raised cattle, sheep, and pigs, and supplemented your diet by fishing and hunting. Every member of the family had a role, from the smallest child chasing geese to the patriarch mending his tools. There was no room for idleness. Survival was a full-time job, but beneath this surface of rural struggle, several powerful forces were converging, creating a perfect storm. It was these forces, bubbling away for decades, that would ultimately push these Scandinavian farmers and fishermen out into the wider world with such explosive energy. The first major factor was the climate. Around the 8th century, Northern Europe experienced something called the medieval warm period. Now, warm is a relative term. It didn't turn Scandinavia into a tropical paradise, but a slight, sustained increase in average temperatures had a massive impact. It meant slightly longer growing seasons. It meant ice-free seas for more of the year. A longer growing season meant more food. More food meant a healthier population. And a healthier population meant more people. This leads us to the second crucial factor. A population boom with better harvests and a slightly less brutal existence. Fewer children were dying in infancy, and people were living a bit longer. Over several generations, this led to a significant increase in population. This sounds like a good thing, right? More hands to work the farm, more warriors to defend the clan. But it created a new, pressing problem. Where do all these people go? And that brings us to our third factor, a severe shortage of good farmland. Scandinavia is a mountainous, rocky, and heavily forested region. Only about 3 to 4% of the land in Norway, for example, is suitable for agriculture. So, as the population grew, the pressure on this limited resource became immense. Younger sons who wouldn't inherit the family farm were left with a stark choice. They could try to clear new, marginal land in the unforgiving wilderness, which was backbreaking and often unproductive work. Or they could look for their fortune elsewhere. The land was literally running out. This created a generation of landless, ambitious, and frankly, dangerous young men with nothing to lose and everything to gain. Compounding this problem was the internal political landscape. The fourth factor was the rise of more powerful and ambitious chiefs. As populations grew and resources became more concentrated, competition between clans intensified. A successful chieftain needed to reward his followers, his herd, with wealth, with silver, with weapons, with land. Generosity was a key measure of a leader's worth. A chieftain who couldn't provide for his men would quickly find his loyalty wavering. So, these jarls were constantly looking for new sources of wealth to maintain and expand their power. They engaged in local raids against each other, but soon, they began to look beyond their own shores for easier targets and greater riches. The internal power struggles created an arms race for wealth and prestige. Whenever I try to imagine this period, I picture myself standing in a cold, windswept farm field in western Norway. It's early morning. The sun is weak. All I can hear is the wind whistling down from the mountains and the distant cry of a seabird. Life is tough, monotonous, and unforgiving. You have to be strong, resourceful, and ruthless, or you simply don't survive. This is the crucible that forged the Viking spirit. It wasn't just about aggression. It was about resilience, ambition, and a desperate need to break free from the constraints of their world. And they were about to get the key that would unlock the door. The fifth and final piece of the puzzle was a revolutionary technological breakthrough. The Viking longship. We often think of the longship as a tool for raiding, but its development began long before the Viking Age. For centuries, Scandinavians had been refining their boat-building skills. By the 8th century, they had perfected a design that was a true marvel of engineering. It was clinker-built, with overlapping planks that made it both strong and incredibly flexible, allowing it to bend with the waves rather than break against them. It had a shallow draft, meaning it could sail in water just a few feet deep. This allowed it to navigate up rivers far inland, striking deep into territories that were previously safe. And crucially, it combined the power of a single, large square sail with the maneuverability of oars. This ship was it was a troop transport, a cargo vessel, and a warship all in one. For the first time, Scandinavians had a vessel that could not only survive the treacherous North Sea, but cross it with speed and reliability. It could appear on a coastline as if from nowhere, strike, and then vanish back into the sea before any real defense could be mounted. The longship gave these land-hungry, ambitious young men the means to reach the rich, poorly defended lands they had only heard about through tales of traders. So, let's put it all together. You have a climate that's just warm enough to cause a population boom. You have a growing population running out of land and opportunity. You have ambitious chieftains desperate for wealth to secure their power. And you have a new piece of technology, the longship, that gives them unprecedented reach and speed. It's a pressure cooker, and the lid is about to fly off. The world of the 8th century was completely unprepared for what was coming. The wealthy kingdoms of Anglo-Saxon England, the fractured Carolingian Empire in Francia, the isolated monasteries of Ireland, they were all sitting there, fat and happy, completely unaware that across the North Sea a society was on the brink of exploding onto the world stage. This wasn't an invasion by a unified army. It was an outflow, an expansion driven by thousands of individual decisions made on hundreds of farms and in dozens of chieftains' halls. The decision of a younger son with no inheritance to join a raiding party. The decision of a jarl to fund an expedition for silver and glory. The decision of a trader to seek new markets and take a few risks along the way. The Viking Age didn't begin with a declaration of war. It began with the quiet creak of timbers as the first longships slipped their crews looking west towards a horizon filled with unknown dangers, but also with limitless opportunity. The story of the Vikings isn't just a story of raids and plunder. It's a story of desperation, innovation, and the powerful, irresistible human drive to build a better life, no matter the cost. The classic longship had emerged. It was the culmination of generations of shipbuilding knowledge, passed down from father to son. They didn't have blueprints or advanced mathematics. They built by eye, by feel, and by a deep, intuitive understanding of wood and water. When you see a reconstructed longship today, or the preserved remains in a museum, what's most striking is how slender and almost delicate they seem. The famous Oseberg ship, discovered in a burial mound in Norway, is a stunning example of their craftsmanship. It's a work of art, with intricate carvings of animals snaking along its prow. Yet this beautiful vessel was also a machine of exploration and conquest. It's a powerful reminder that for the Vikings, form and function were one and the same, and the distances they traveled are just staggering. Using these ships, they pushed the boundaries of the known world. At their peak, the Vikings didn't just raid, they ruled. When we think of Vikings, we often picture longship, horned helmets, which they didn't actually wear, and brutal raids on coastal monasteries. And while that's part of the story, it's not the whole story. Because these fierce raiders weren't just pirates, they were nation builders, explorers, and kings. They didn't just plunder lands. They settled them, ruled them, and created empires that would change the course of history forever. Forget the simple stereotype. We're diving into the story of how the Vikings went from raiders to rulers, building a vast network of kingdoms that stretched across Europe and beyond. This is the story of the true Viking Empire. The Viking Age, stretching roughly from the late 8th to the late 11th century, began with hit-and-run attacks. Small bands of Norsemen would sail their incredible longships, strike quickly, and vanish with treasure and slaves before any real defense could be mounted. The raid on Lindisfarne in 793 is the classic example, sending shockwaves through Christian Europe. For decades, this was the pattern. But patterns change. As the Vikings returned to the same places year after year, they started to realize something. Why just raid a land when you can own it? Why steal its wealth when you can tax it? The ambition grew. The small raiding parties became great armies, and the goal shifted from plunder to conquest. One of the most significant examples of this shift happened in England. After decades of raiding, a massive Viking force, known as the Great Heathen Army, arrived in 865. But this army didn't just raid and leave. It came to stay. Over the next decade, they fought and conquered kingdom after kingdom in Anglo-Saxon England. They established a vast territory in the north and east of the country that came to be known as the Dane. This wasn't a temporary military camp. It was a Viking kingdom on English soil. Norse laws, customs, and language took root. Cities like York, which the Vikings called Jorvik, became major centers of Viking trade and power. For nearly a century, a significant part of England was ruled by Danes. It was a clear sign that the Vikings were no longer just visitors, but their empire building wasn't confined to England. Across the English Channel, in what is now France, another Viking legacy was being forged. The French king, Charles the Simple, was tired of the constant Viking raids up the Seine River, which repeatedly threatened Paris itself. In 911, he made a deal with a powerful Viking leader named Rollo. Charles offered Rollo a huge piece of land in northern France in exchange for two things. Rollo had to swear loyalty to the king and, crucially, protect the coast from any other Viking raiders. Rollo agreed. He and his men settled the land, adopted Christianity, and integrated with the local population. This territory became known as Normandy, literally, the land of the Northmen. These Normans, descendants of Vikings, would become one of the most powerful forces in Europe. In fact, it was Rollo's direct descendant, William the Conqueror, who would sail from Normandy in 1066 to conquer England, ending the Anglo-Saxon era and bringing the Viking legacy full circle. Further east, the Viking influence was just as profound, shaping the very origins of two modern nations. Swedish Vikings, known as the Varangians, traveled not west, but south and east along the vast river systems of what is now Russia and Ukraine. They weren't just raiding, they were trading, seeking the silver and silks of the Byzantine Empire and the Caliphate. Along these trade routes, they established fortified settlements. According to the ancient chronicles, the local Slavic and Finnic tribes were fighting amongst themselves and invited a Varangian chieftain named Rurik to come and rule over them to bring order. Rurik established his rule in Novgorod. His successor, Oleg, moved south and captured the city of Kiev, declaring it the mother of all Rus cities. This state, known as the Kievan Rus, became a powerful and wealthy kingdom that was the foundation for both modern Russia and Ukraine. The very name Rus is believed to have come from these Norse settlers. They called it Vinland. Though their settlement there didn't last, it represents the absolute peak of their westward expansion, a testament to their incredible seamanship and pioneering spirit. These Atlantic islands were all connected, part of a vast Viking network of trade and influence. The pinnacle of Viking power can be seen in the incredible story of Canute the Great. In the early 11th century, Canute, a Danish prince, ruled a massive domain that historians call the North Sea Empire. Through inheritance and conquest, he became the King of England, Denmark, and Norway, and held sway over parts of Sweden. This was no longer the world of small, squabbling clans. This was a Viking superpower, a sophisticated political entity that controlled the crucial trade routes of the North Sea. Canute was a respected Christian king, a shrewd statesman who minted coins, issued laws, and maintained peace across his vast empire. He wasn't seen as a foreign barbarian in England. He was seen as a legitimate and effective ruler. He demonstrated that a Viking leader could govern a complex, multi-ethnic empire just as well as any other European monarch. The raider had truly become a king. It's amazing how fast things can change. In the span of a few generations, the Vikings transformed from coastal terrors into the founders of duchies, kingdoms, and empires. One generation was raiding for gold, and the next was minting it with their own face on it. That's the power of ambition mixed with incredible opportunity. The Vikings seized their moment. Their long ships gave them mobility. Their warrior culture gave them an edge, but it was their adaptability and political savvy that allowed them to build lasting legacies. The Danelaw Normandy, the Kievan Rus, the North Sea Empire. These weren't just footnotes in history. They were powerful states that shaped the political and cultural map of Europe in ways we can still see today. The age of raids was just the beginning. The age of Viking empires was their true legacy. What really defeated the Vikings? It wasn't a single army or a crushing naval battle. No, what truly brought the Viking Age to a close was time itself. For 3 centuries, from the late 700s to the 11th century, the Norsemen were the unstoppable force of Europe. Their longships sliced through waves, their axes carved out kingdoms, and their sagas were written in blood and fire. But by the year 1100, the world they had dominated was transforming, and the very reasons for their existence were starting to fade away. This is the story of how the Age of Vikings didn't end with a bang, but with a slow, inevitable whisper. To understand their end, we first have to remember their beginning. Why did they start raiding in the first place? It was a perfect storm of factors. Overpopulation in Scandinavia, internal power struggles pushing chieftains and their warriors out, and the allure of rich, undefended targets in places like England and France. Early medieval Europe was fragmented, a patchwork of weak kingdoms and wealthy monasteries that were practically begging to be plundered. The Vikings' revolutionary shipbuilding technology gave them the ultimate advantage: speed and surprise. They could strike anywhere along the coast or deep inland via rivers, take what they wanted, and vanish before any real defense could be mounted. For a young man in Norway or Denmark with no land and few prospects, joining a raid was a ticket to wealth, fame, and status. It was the ultimate high-risk, high-reward career path, and for a long time, the rewards were immense. But here's the thing about a successful strategy. Eventually, everyone else learns how to counter it. The rest of Europe didn't just sit there and take it. Over time, they adapted. Kings and lords started building better defenses. They constructed stone castles instead of wooden forts. They organized standing armies and rapid response forces. A new type of heavily armored knight emerged, a professional soldier who could stand toe-to-toe with a Viking berserker. Coastal towns built watchtowers and warning systems. The element of surprise, the Vikings' greatest weapon, was slowly being neutralized. Raiding was becoming a much more dangerous and less profitable business. Why risk your life sailing to France just to be met by a wall of disciplined knights, when you used to be able to just walk into a monastery and fill your pockets? The cost-benefit analysis was changing. At the same time, a powerful new idea was sweeping through Scandinavia, an idea more potent than any sword or axe: Christianity. The conversion of the Norse people was a gradual but transformative process. It wasn't just about changing gods, it was about changing an entire worldview. The Old Norse religion celebrated warriors who died in battle, promising them a place in Valhalla. Raiding was a sacred and honorable activity. Christianity, on the other hand, preached peace, stability, and a different kind of morality. It came with a whole new social and political structure. As Scandinavian kings like Olaf Tryggvason in Norway and Canute the Great in Denmark converted, they brought their kingdoms into the fold of Christian Europe. This was a strategic move. A Christian king was seen as a legitimate ruler by other European monarchs, not just a pirate chief. It opened up doors for diplomacy, royal marriages, and, most importantly, legitimate trade. Suddenly, being a part of the European club was more appealing than raiding it. The church also worked to centralize power, supporting the king against unruly local chieftains, the very men who led the raiding parties. The old Viking way of life was being dismantled from within. This brings us to another huge shift: the centralization of power. The Viking Age began in a world of petty chieftains and jarls, each leading their own war bands. The king was often just the most powerful chieftain among many. But by the 11th century, the kingdoms of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden were becoming more like the centralized feudal states of the rest of Europe. Kings were consolidating their power, creating national laws, minting their own coins, and raising national armies. This had two major effects. First, it meant that the king, not the local jarl, decided when and where to go to war. The free-for-all raiding culture was suppressed in favor of state-controlled military campaigns. Second, it created stability at home. Young men who might have once gone a Viking for fortune now had other options. They could serve in the king's army, become a farmer on more stable land, or engage in trade. The internal pressures that had pushed the first Vikings out to sea were easing. And let's not forget the economy. The Vikings weren't just raiders. They were also incredible traders and explorers. They established vast trade networks that stretched from North America to Constantinople. But as the raiding became less profitable, the trading became more important. Cities like Dublin, York, and Kiev, all founded or built up by Vikings, became bustling commercial hubs. Instead of stealing silver from a monastery, a Norseman could now earn it by trading furs, amber, and walrus ivory. This shift from a raid-based economy to a trade-based economy was fundamental. It required peace, stability, and good relationships with your neighbors, an exact opposite of the raiding ethos. The Viking descendant living in the 12th century was more likely to be a merchant, negotiating a contract than a warrior sharpening his axe. There's one more factor: a silent, invisible force that shaped their destiny: the climate. The Viking Age coincided with a period known as the medieval warm period. The North Atlantic was warmer, with less sea ice, making those long voyages in open ships easier and safer. It also allowed for farming in places that are difficult to cultivate today, like Greenland. But around the 12th and 13th centuries, the climate began to cool again, entering what's known as the Little Ice Age. The North Atlantic became stormier and more choked with ice. Sea travel became more perilous. The Norse colonies in Greenland, which had survived for centuries, eventually failed as their growing seasons shortened and their connection to Europe was severed. The very environment that had enabled their expansion began to turn against them. So, when did it all end? Historians often point to the year 1066 as a symbolic turning point. In that single year, you have two major events. First, the Norwegian king, Harald Hardrada, often called the last great Viking, invaded England, but was defeated and killed at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Just a few weeks later, William the Conqueror, a descendant of Vikings who had settled in Normandy, successfully invaded and conquered England. It's a perfect snapshot of the transition. The old-style Viking raider was defeated, while the new-style Viking descendant, a Christian, feudal duke, became a king. The era of raiding was over. The era of assimilation and kingdom-building had taken its place. The Viking Age faded away, not because they were conquered, but because they evolved. They assimilated into the cultures they had once terrorized, becoming the Normans in France, the Rus in Russia, and an essential part of the genetic and cultural makeup of the British Isles. They didn't disappear. They just became something new. Their legacy is written on the map of the world and in the DNA of millions. They shaped England, France, Russia, and even touched the shores of North America 5 centuries before Columbus. Their spirit of exploration, trade, and daring didn't die. It was absorbed into the fabric of a new Europe, a Europe that they themselves had helped to create. The age of long ships and horned helmets was over, but the impact of the Vikings is with us to this day. They weren't defeated by an army. They were simply transformed by time. Have you ever wondered what happened to the Vikings? Did they just disappear? The truth is, they never really left. The Viking Age might have ended around the 11th century, but their influence is all around us, woven into the very fabric of our modern world. They didn't just vanish into history books. They evolved, they assimilated, and they left behind a legacy that continues to shape us in ways you might not even realize. Let's start with something you probably use every single day. Language. If you've ever said words like egg, sky, window, or even the days of the week, like Thursday, that's Thor's day, you're speaking Viking. When Norse settlers came to England, their Old Norse language mingled with Old English. It wasn't a hostile takeover of words. It was a conversation between cultures. They traded goods, and they traded words, simplifying grammar and adding hundreds of new terms to the English vocabulary. They created some of the earliest forms of parliamentary democracy, like the Althing in Iceland, one of the oldest surviving parliaments in the world. They believed in order and community, and their legal systems laid the groundwork for concepts of justice and social structure that we still recognize today. Their influence also reshaped the political map of Europe. The Rus Vikings traveled east, establishing the Kievan Rus, the precursor to modern-day Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. In France, a Viking leader named Rollo was granted a chunk of land to stop his raids. That land became known as Normandy, the land of the Northmen. And who came from Normandy? William the Conqueror, the Norman duke who successfully invaded England in 1066, forever changing the course of British history and its monarchy. From the Tsars of Russia to the kings of England, Viking blood flows through many of Europe's royal lines. Now, let's talk about their culture, their stories, their art, and their beliefs. The image of a horned helmet, that's a myth, a romantic invention from the 19th century. Real Viking art was intricate and beautiful, filled with swirling animals and complex patterns found on everything from jewelry. They were a way of understanding the world, of grappling with concepts like fate, courage, and sacrifice. These stories are so powerful that they continue to inspire us today, forming the backbone of blockbuster movies, epic television shows, and best-selling books. They've become a part of our global cultural mythology. So, where did they go? As Christianity spread across Europe, many Vikings converted. As they settled in new lands, they intermarried and integrated. The Viking raiders slowly became the Norman knight, the Russian prince, the Irish merchant, and the English farmer. They didn't disappear. They became part of the societies they once terrorized or traded with. Their DNA is mixed into the gene pool of tens of millions of people across Europe and beyond. They are a part of the story of countless nations, a foundational element in their development. The Vikings were more than just warriors. They were creators, explorers, dreamers, and innovators. Their courage pushed humanity across treacherous oceans. Their cultures and legal systems helped shape entire nations. Their stories, filled with gods and giants, heroes and monsters, still echo in our imagination. The Viking Age may be over, but the Viking legacy is alive and well. It's in our language, our laws, our stories, and perhaps even in our own adventurous spirit. The Vikings, thousands of miles from home and vastly outnumbered, found it impossible to maintain a permanent settlement in the face of hostility from the local peoples. After a few years of attempts to colonize Vinland, they packed up and sailed back to Greenland. Their incredible discovery faded into the realm of stories and sagas, a half-forgotten legend in Europe for centuries. It's a fascinating what-if of history. What if the Vikings had managed to establish a permanent foothold in the New World? How different would our world be today? So, the next time you hear the word Viking, remember Leif Erikson. Remember the families who settled Iceland and the hardy souls who clung to life in Greenland. They were more than just warriors. They were master shipbuilders, brilliant navigators, and fearless explorers who traveled from the rivers of Russia to the shores of North America. They expanded the boundaries of the known world and left a legacy of discovery that continues to inspire us. They were pioneers who sailed to the edge of the world and beyond. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the past. If you enjoyed learning about the true story of the Viking explorers, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might find it interesting. And if you're new here, subscribe to our channel. It helps us out a lot and ensures you won't miss our next adventure into history. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.